Today we have the honor of sitting down with Dr. Frank Anderson. Dr. Anderson originally trained at Harvard and is now known as one of the world's leading trauma experts. For nearly 30 years, he worked alongside Bessel Kolk, who famously wrote the international bestseller, The Body Keeps the Score. Over the last decade, Dr. Anderson has also written multiple bestsellers on trauma himself and has been featured on The Today Show, Good Morning America, and the Huffington Post. Most remarkably, though, Dr. Anderson is not just a trauma expert, he is also a trauma survivor. This year, he published a memoir on his own journey, which makes this one of the more fascinating interviews we have ever done. Dr. Anderson speaks to you from a place of going through the trauma and also helping other people go through their own trauma. Because of the explosion of interest around trauma, this is without a doubt one of the most anticipated podcasts we've done to date. It's estimated that 70% of people will experience a traumatic event throughout their lifetime. So what's the difference between those who end up developing PTSD and those that process the experience well? What even is trauma anyway? In this episode, we cover some of these basic questions before diving into the deep stuff, like what happens to the brain when you're traumatized and the foundational building blocks of healing. We believe this is one of the most special episodes we've ever done, and that Dr. Anderson shares so many wonderful insights that can make a huge impact on your life. Processing traumatic experiences is one of the most difficult things we'll ever have to deal with. But as you'll learn from Frank's story, there is light to be found on the other side. So without further ado, Dr. Frank Anderson. Frank, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I feel like this is going to be one of the more interesting interviews that we've done because we've had people that have shared their personal story on this podcast. And then we've had people like scientists or subject matter experts kind of share from a more clinical or their expertise on topic, but never both simultaneously.
Yep.
And so I feel like that's what's so special about your story. Obviously, you trained at Harvard. You're known as a trauma expert, but you're also a survivor of trauma, as well as we learned from your memoir that came out this year. So I think that's just incredible. I've actually never cried so much reading a book before as you're reading your book.
That's so good.
I don't know if I've actually ever cried before when I read a book, maybe movies. But
we're done.
Yeah.
Thank you. Like that's the point, but that's really meaningful for me that it touched you like that. Like that's really the point.
It was just the whole story arc and from start to finish, and I just thought it was just so moving. So,
beautiful. Thank you.
So before kind of putting your scientist hat on and getting into kind of the nuts and bolts of trauma, I kind of wanted to start with a specific moment in your own personal story that was in the memoir, because I really think it articulates to the general audience like where you were at and like what happened to you. So it was late at night. I believe that it was way back when you were studying at Harvard. You were watching a movie with your wife at the time. And so can you tell us kind of what transpired next?
So interesting. So a couple things I want to say about it. First off, you talk about a moment. Like the way I wrote the memoir was a collection of moments, like standout moments. I'd like put a list of moments and, wrote a version from me and then wrote the book from those experiences and then put them together at the end. So when you say that, like I go right back there. Like I can totally visualize the bedroom. I know what the bed looked like. We were watching a movie, and then I totally was taken over. And that was the first time that ever happened. I don't even remember what movie we were watching, but we were post-call, like we were exhausted, we were sitting in bed, we were watching a movie, and my body was taken over. Like I just became something else, and it freaked me out. And, I was in another world. Like now I know that was a flashback. Like it was a total flashback that I had. But at the time, I had never experienced anything like that before in my life. And I was just totally taken over. Get him away, get him away. And my then wife at the time was freaked out. Like this was not a common occurrence for me. I was somebody who functioned well. Like I worked really hard at functioning well. So I was freaked out. I was totally freaked out. I didn't know what the hell was going on for me. She was freaked out. She's like, who are you talking about? Nobody's here. It's just me. Like it was totally new for both of us in that way. And I, as a survivor, you work hard to be in control. You want to be in control because trauma is about having no control, right? So it's really the opposite. So this flipped me out. And I called my then therapist at the time, because I didn't know what the hell was going on. It was pretty early in my training. Um, yeah, I can even feel the fear as we're talking about it, and I was desperate for help, and he did and said the right things, very kind of appropriate psychiatric responses. This is temporary. It won't happen very long. Don't worry, you'll be fine. Everything will be okay. And it just did not land for me. It didn't land because I was so terrified, and I was like, this guy doesn't fucking get it. That's what it felt like in the moment. So I was so terrified. I needed somebody to join me, to be like, I get it. I'm with you. I've been there. You've got this. But he was like up here in that more clinical space, and I was like desperate in this somebody please help me space, and it didn't land. And I really put a wall up. And I put a wall up. I'm like, this guy does not know what trauma feels like. Like, I knew that in that moment. I felt it, and it's one of the things now that is really important for me to teach therapists. Like, you just can't be available to help somebody if you aren't willing to go there yourself. I think people need to be joined fully. I don't have to go through the same thing, but you have to feel felt when you're in those moments of terror and overwhelm. And look, he was a great guy. Like, I love him. Like, I was in therapy for 10 years with him 5 times a week. Like, he was a really good human, but he didn't get trauma in a way that made me at the time when I was freaking out feel safe, and I kind of feel bad, but it made me learn a lot,
So you said the word terror. So you're watching that movie, and then what did you start screaming?
Get it, he's coming after me. Oh my God, stop him. I'm not safe. Like, I was just like, I think it was talking about my father. That's what I think was happening. And again, it was so weird because I got taken over. Like, stop him, no, get him out of here, get him out of here. I'm like screaming like this. And again, my wife was like, nobody's here. It's just me. What are you talking about? And then finally, I'm like, I guess I said my dad or something like this. And she's like, we're in Boston. He's in Chicago. Like, she was like, what are you talking about?
And so was there violence or something on the movie that had
I can't
activated you?
remember. This is the thing that is striking to me, I talk about being in therapy as a kid and having so little memory. I was racking my brain, like, what was the movie? What triggered this event for me that was so overpowering? And I don't remember. It was gone. Like, I don't have access to what movie we were watching, but whatever the circumstances were, it transported me back into my history as a kid. You know what I mean? And I was totally taken over. Like, it was really like I wasn't there in any kind of rational way. And I was in my history in a full-on way. And I had never.
You still remember that feeling?
Oh my God, yeah. As you
And
just mentioned it.
What was like going through your body? What did it feel like?
So, what I can tell you, I was in a fetal position on the bed. I was like this, laying in a fetal position and writhing. My feet were moving, and I was like, no, 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 no. Like, here's the thing about it. When you say, what did it feel like in your body? It's not actually a feeling. Trauma is not a feeling. It's a reaction. So it's the way I will say, you can't put words to the experience. It's that overwhelming. It takes you over. It's like builds like this, and it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger in fear. Like, that's the way I describe it. Like, I'm much better at it now than I was before around, having the awareness, like, once you work through the trauma reaction or response, then you can actually start having feelings. People don't get the difference. You're freaking out, you're having a panic attack, or you're in a shame spiral, or you're dissociating. Those aren't emotions. Those are reactions, right? And so that moment was like what the fuck? get me the fuck out of here. Oh my God. Like it's intolerable, just intolerable. It's not an emotion. It's like after you can process and kind of now I can be with it. I could be with it and I'm not taken over by it, right? And then you can kind of describe it and attach words that match feelings.
Yeah.
When people are in their trauma, it really takes you over. And that was the only time, honestly, in my life that I was fully taken over by it in a way that, it was horrible.
So can you explain, so what was the source of your trauma? You mentioned your dad. What happened in your past, your childhood that would lead to a reaction like that?
So it started really early, as you know in the book. I don't know how much I want to get into the early stuff, but because I want people to kind of read about it and let that unfold. But what I'll say is this, and I always knew, like, never knew I was going to write a memoir, like ever. When they asked me to write a memoir, I'm like, are you crazy? But once it got landed in my head, like, okay, I'm going to do this, I knew the opening. It was like, I was so clear, you're not going to school today. So clear. I was 6 years old, walk into my parents' bedroom, and they're like, you're not going to school today, Frankie. I'm like, what do you mean? Like, I'm not sick. What's going on? We're going to the hospital, downtown Chicago. Like the big hospital, I must be dying. Like I didn't know what the hell was going on. And I had a day of psych testing, which I didn't understand or know what the hell that was at the time, and then was in therapy for 6 years every day. And not every day, 6 years every week, once a week for 6 years. And it was through that process that it was like, something's wrong with me. I'm wrong. I'm broken. I don't know what it is, but I am not right. And I have to learn how to be normal. I have to learn how to be like a regular person, And the thing that was kind of good for me was there was a no hitting rule in the house when I started therapy. So whatever ended up happening is the therapist.
What age was that?
Probably, I think it was like around 7 or 8. Like, I don't know how soon the no hitting rule came because I went to these meetings and then my parents saw somebody. They saw a couples therapist and I was being seen individually. So probably around 7 or 8, there was a no hitting rule.
So there was before that then?
Hitting?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Yeah, but a lot of it was blocked out. So it was confusing because something's wrong with me. I'm going to this special meeting. My brother's not going. So something's wrong with me. But my dad hated me. Like that, what I knew is he hated me. Okay? So it was really confusing. Like there wasn't this like, hey, we're doing something wrong. Hey, we need to, stop this. I was grateful that whoever these people were like a no hitting rule. We started getting grounded instead of being hit. So that was kind of better. But actually the hitting didn't stop, honestly. It wasn't maybe the beatings that I got when I was younger to the same degree, but it would be like sitting at the kitchen table and I would say something like a smart ass comment, might crack me across the face. Like it would be things like that. That was after the no hitting rule. But what was the most honestly terrifying for me, separate from the hitting? I had this moment, like the hitting stuff. I had this moment, was like, I can remember like being covered like this with my hands over my face. It's like, cover the face, cover the face. He can hit your back. And I remember feeling the blows on my back. It's like, your back is strong. Your back can handle this. Don't let him get the face. So I had memories of like that earlier than 6 probably. But the yelling and the screaming after the no hitting rule was really horrible. Like it was really, really horrible. I understand now, like it's like yelling is the new hitting in our generation. Like it's okay to yell at your kids. supposedly. Like, you're not supposed to hit back in that day. Hitting was part of what was more normalized.
What would
Now,
he say?
you are so good at this. I'm going to tell you that right now because you're just, I'm like right back in so many ways in it. Um, so it's like, you cock-sucking motherfucking son of a bitch. And he'd like, I'd look and I'd see the eye, like I'd see the kill instinct in his eye. Like I'd see the moment he switched. And then he'd start chasing me through the house and he'd be yelling, cocksucking motherfucking son of a bitch. Like, I didn't even know what those words were. I didn't know what those words meant, right? And you paranoid schizophrenic. I was like, well, that's not good. I don't know what that is. Like, I was 6 or 7, years old. And I'd run through the house. This was like over and over. Like, it was weird. They're like, you can't hit him anymore. But it was like his rage was still in him. So this is what he ended up doing. And for me, that was probably more impactful emotionally because the hitting, like, I dissociated from my body. Like, I remember that time where the blows were on my back, but a lot of that I disconnected from. I really dissociated from a lot of the physical stuff. Like, turns out I was hit really early, like really, really early, which I found out later in my life.
What's really early?
In the crib.
In the crib?
In the crib, yeah. Yeah, and I had all these repetitive dreams, most of my adult life, of like a baby in a crib and this big dark figure, almost it looked like a witch in a cloak. And I would just have this repetitive dream on what the hell is that about? What the hell is that? I had no idea what that was until much later in my life. Found out. My mom told me. Well, actually, my dad told my brother, and then my mom told me that I started getting hit in the crib. And so that was like, well, then it wasn't about me being gay. Like, I didn't know I was gay. I came out really late, 32 years after marrying a woman. But like, why does he hate me? Why does he hate me? Right? It didn't make sense. I'm wrong. I'm wrong. Whatever I am, I'm wrong. And the thing that was weird about this therapy as a kid now, and my mom said this to me recently, she's like, honey, it was a form of conversion therapy. Like, we didn't know. We were doing what we thought was best for you. But I remember them trying to make me something else. Like, it was really clear, like, you're going to play baseball, you're going to go shooting a gun with your brother. You know what I mean? So I knew, like, I was wrong, but then they were trying to make me right,
It almost seemed like your mother played almost like a simultaneously equal role in facilitating this trauma and this
100%.
abuse. And so how did that unfold? What was the relationship like with her?
So that's the reality in most situations, and people aren't really cognizant of that. Like, you can't have an abusive parent without a passive parent. They have to go together. You have an abusive parent and you have a kind of a regulated, healthy parent. They get a divorce, they leave the family, they don't allow it to continue. Okay, so in order for family dysfunction to continue, it has to be a combo. I talk about parental wound pairing, because when you're abused, when you grow up in a dysfunctional family, you get a wound from each parent, whether it's two moms, two dads, mom and dad, doesn't matter the gender. But you can't sustain an alcoholic father without a checked out, depressed mother, or vice versa. Do you know what I mean? It could certainly be a yelling, screaming mother with a passive father who's never there. So it is, and what ends up happening is you tend to like focus on the louder one first. A lot of my later therapy was on the complicated relationship with my mother, because it was super complicated. It still is super complicated, honestly. But she loved me. That I knew. Like, I felt love from her. Never felt it from my dad. That's why To Be Loved is the title of the book. Whole life worth of journey to be loved, right? It was so clear. But she loved me undoubtedly, like I knew that. But I also knew that she would always choose him over me 100% of the time. So I was in a bind as a kid, like desperate for her love and attention, and knowing she would betray me over and over and over again. Like you talk about I said that yelling and screaming and chasing me through the house was more significant than the hitting, at least in my impact, for the impact of me. Equally as traumatic was her knocking on the bedroom door when I'd run into my bedroom and lock the door when he was chasing me, was her desperately coming into the room. Frankie, open the door, Frankie. No, you're going to tell him. Please, I promise I won't tell him. Like she was desperate to connect with me, probably partly to soothe me, but also to make it all go away because she needed him for herself and her own issues, and she'd say to me, he loves you, can't you? He loves you. I'm like, I hate him, he hates me, divorce him. I'd say all these things. I hate him, he hates me, he loves you. And then inevitably, she would go tell my father, don't tell him, I promise I won't. And then he'd like, so you think I'm a monster? You want her to divorce me? Like he'd always let me know, I know what you told her. So I felt betrayed violated by him. Violated isn't the right word. Like terrorized by him and betrayed by her over and over and over again. Like that was the combination that it was like.
So there's no safe place.
No safe place. That's exactly what I was thinking. Like I had no safety. No safety and what I'm struggling with today, which is interesting, is do my needs matter, like really, to another person? I'm like 61 years old and you're like, how could I be struggling with do my needs matter? But it really brings me back to these moments. And I can see this kid, I'm very visual, like on one side, betrayal, on the other side, physical terror, alone. And can I ask for something? Can it be about me instead of about them? And it's really what I struggle with to this day is like, I can help the world. I'm helping the world heal trauma, help the world. And it's like, do I matter? Do I matter really to somebody? Like I'm feeling more, yes, I do. Like I'm feeling more confident because I matter to myself now in a way that I never did before. I really do matter to myself, and that feels really good. I'll tell you this story about releasing this memoir, which was a big deal for my family. It's one thing to write a memoir, and then it's another thing when all the family secrets
I can imagine
get told when nobody else wants to tell the story, right? But there were two. I can say this has been very healing for me, very healing around me mattering. 2 times in my life, I was like, I'm choosing me over everybody else. It's 2, really 2. One is when I came out at 32, I grew up in a conservative Midwestern family. I was like, I will lose everyone if I come out, It took me 2 years to tell my parents after I came out. So I was living in Boston. They were living in Chicago. So that was one time I'm like, I'm choosing me. Like, I don't give a shit. I'm willing to lose everything and everyone. So that was one time. And then the second was releasing this memoir. It really was. And I had this conversation, I think it was the week before the release date with my mom, because I was filming some TV show in Chicago. And, oh, what are you here for, honey? It's like, oh, just talking about this memoir. She still hasn't read it. I don't think she can read it. She was highlighting it at one point, all the things that were wrong, inaccurate in it. I was like, this is my story. This is my truth. And I'm telling this story about my life. And I'll change the details as much as I can to protect the people in my family, different names and all this stuff. And I said to her, and this was huge for me, I was like, and if this destroys our relationship, it's worth it to me now. And I don't want it to, and I love you, and I hope you can be in my life. But if you can't be in my life, I'm choosing me over you. And I'm sorry to say that, Mom, but I am. And that was a huge moment for me. That was a huge moment. To tell you the truth, in the moment, that was the first time in my life she said, "I'm sorry I didn't protect you." Like, it was a huge moment. It was the first time ever she acknowledged anything. And I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. Like, this was incredible. This was like the week before the book came out. I was like, it's huge. It's huge. You know, I had a moment like that with my dad before he died. And then I had this moment with her. I'm like, this is amazing. And kind of, she's not really doing her work. It kind of went all underground. I know that moment happened with her. And then it kind of went all the way. Got kind of back into her denial. Why are you doing this? What's wrong with you? You know, she kind of resorted back to her old way.
After the memoir came
After
out.
the memoir
So this
came
is
out.
like real time. This is like last 3 months.
Yeah, this is real time. Yeah, just about a month ago, she's like, we should be together. She's like, it's wrong that she wouldn't talk to me for probably 2.5 months after. She's like, she just couldn't talk to me. She had so much shame around all the secrets that she grew up with and all the stuff in her life that, you know, her girlfriend, you know, my son Frankie's writing a book. Like, I don't want anybody to read it. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, my son Frankie's on TV.
It's so funny that you say that, because we've had other guests on the show that have said the same thing, and we've actually haven't gotten into specific details, because like on one end, you're making this decision for you when like you didn't do that your whole life.
100%.
And then the other thing is like, okay, if I had a traumatic childhood or abusive childhood, or things happened in the household revolving my parents, my siblings, or whatever,
Right.
it's like, to share my story with the world means in some
Yes.
way exposing
100%.
what happened, exposing them, and it's like such a sensitive.
It's a horrible
place.
dilemma.
Yes.
It's a horrible dilemma.
Especially when your story can help heal a lot of people or
100%.
contribute to healing, you know?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And I know a lot of people who have written memoirs who have had horribly destructive things happen in their relationships and their family because of telling truth. Like, it was one of the things that I got clear about, the importance of truth. Truth. Now, truth and perception. Like, you do couples therapy, and one person says this is their truth, and another person says this. It happens all the time. So I'm aware this was my truth. It doesn't have to be your truth. You can have a different truth. I don't care. But my truth is important to me.
But there's an objective truth of what happened to you, right?
It's my experience, you know. There's an objective truth, but another person sees it differently because of the lens that they approach the situation.
Yeah,
And so you have one, you know, like, look at that curtain, you know, well, that's like a emerald green. No, that's a forest green. You know what I mean? People will have their own perception about an experience, and that we know is true in working through trauma, right? You know, you work through that. Perception and experience is really important. But it is your perception and your experience. And part of what we do in trauma healing is release all that you carry around it. Like, that's part of it.
One of the things that I think might be confusing to people who have not experienced trauma before is a person's relationship with their abuser. And so like can bring out bizarre behavior. And so obviously, despite your father abusing you, you wrote you would do anything to get his attention. And so you wrote, growing up, my brother and I were starved for my father's attention. Can you kind of share that story about what you guys would do to get him to come into your bedroom at night? Because I feel like that when I read that, I was like, that on one level, like the yelling and the hitting and all this stuff happening, you would think, I want to run away from this person at all costs. But then I'm reading this, I'm like, this is like, no, he's like moving towards the
100%.
abuser. And
So this is the complexity which people don't understand. And it took me a long time to understand this, is like, every human being wants to be loved in a core way. We want to be loved. And I'm going to go a little spiritual right here, because my belief now is that we all come from source, God, love, whatever you want to call it. And when we come down here into human form, we've had a separation from unity and love. And so we're constantly seeking love in connection, right? And that's kind of my philosophy around this. Like, I think this trauma was part of what I was supposed to learn here, and part of what my purpose is in this world. So I wanted to be loved. I still wanted to be loved. I wanted it for my mother and I wanted it for my father, despite all the horrible things that happened around betrayal and physical abuse. So you have to split it off. Kids cannot hold that complexity. I love you and I hate you. Kids can't hold that. Annie Lennox line, thin line between love and hate. It's really true. Those are two intense emotions, right? Did I hate my father? 100%, most of my life. Did I want to be loved by my father? 100%. But it's too hard for people to hold the complexity of that. So they're held in different places. It's like it's split off. So I was like, I'll get all A's. I'll go to Harvard. Then he'll love me. Do you know what I mean? And I hate the motherfucker. I want him to die. Like, so both are true. Both are true. And I think it's hard for people to hold that complexity. But it is the reality. So my brother and I, my dad worked in a pharmacy, worked 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. So he was totally not around a lot. So we were starved for attention, and we wanted to, like two boys wanted their father, you know what I mean? Like we did. He was never around. And so we would eat dinners, and then my dad and mom would have dinners at 10 o'clock at night. So oftentimes different dinners or whatever. So he'd come home. My brother and I laugh at this. It was so crazy. We were young kids. We thought this would work. We're like, I know what we'll do. We're going to wrap ourselves in blankets. And we're going to tuck the blankets under the mattress. And we'll grab all the blankets we can. So we went into the linen closet. We got sheets. We got blankets. So there were like 6 or 8 things we'd wrap around ourselves, tight as we could, tucked it under the mattress. And we'd start yelling. Ah, la, la, la. We'd say all of a sudden, he's like, shut up, you sons of bitches. And we'd like laugh, and then we'd do it again. He's like, one more time, I'm going to come up there and give you something to laugh about, right? Of course, we did it again. And he'd come marching up those stairs, the same stairs that he chased me through the house. And like, I was closer to the door. My brother was farther away. And like, in one fell swoop, he rips off like 8 sheets and blankets and cracks us on the ass, on the back, whatever. Gives us a slap. Then he goes to my brother's bed, rips the things off and slaps him, and then he goes downstairs. And, like at the time, we thought it was kind of funny. He didn't beat us. He just gave us only one crack, right? It was like, oh, well, that's a sting, right? But like when I was writing it, I was like, yeah, like negative attention is better than no attention. That's what I can hold about it now. And there's so many people that are in abusive relationships, and I don't think they really get this concept that negative attention is better than no attention at all. Elie Wiesel, in his book around the Holocaust night, said the opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference. And that is true in my experience. Like, nothing is more terrifying than negative. And that's an example of that. Like, I would rather have a crack on the ass because at least he's there than to have no one there at all, because alone is more terrifying than negative.
Yes, I mean, you have this whole backdrop of your personal story, and one thing that I thought was interesting, obviously a lot of people are probably familiar with Bessel van der Kolk.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have this relationship with your biological father, but then I think you said in the book that Bessel, like as your professional career took off and you described yourself as a personal protege, but then you also said that he was like a father to you. So
Yeah.
can you explain like how that relationship
Yeah,
developed?
so it's interesting. Now, like I've had several mentor relationships in that search to be loved, right? I wasn't conscious of it at the time. Got into Harvard, I did the second round of therapy when I was in my residency, and then lo and behold, Bessel van der Kolk's at my residency training program in Harvard. He's like this world-renowned trauma expert. So I dove into learning everything about trauma. I become like this, the golden child, as I kind of always did, and started becoming the psychiatrist for him at the trauma center. And it was, again, like looking for love and admiration from this man who was powerful and in power and knew a lot of stuff. So, it was kind of a repeat pattern in some way. And, he's a big, powerful person. He's a brilliant man. And I was desperately wanting his love and also afraid of him too. Do you know what I mean? So I kind of replayed a relationship with him in some ways. And, he wasn't my father, but I brought all the stuff from my relationship with my dad to that relationship with him, right? And so it didn't work out so well. I got frightened and I kind of pulled away, right? I have a great relationship with him now. I really love him. He's done a lot for me and he's an amazing man. But I was working through some of my stuff with him, and when you're a mentor, you don't want to be working through.
It's a different type of,
It's a different type of relationship. But then I did it again with Dick Schwartz, who's the founder of the internal family systems model of therapy. I was like, oh, this guy's mellow. He's laid back. He'll be the father, that I never had and loved. And again, and I said this to him during my healing. I was like, what was it like to be with somebody who admired you? And I dedicated 15 years of my life to him and his cause. I'm like, what was it like to be on the receiving end of all that wanting? Because I had all this wanting, and he didn't really answer it, but it was like me taking responsibility for my side of the relationship, And I've kind of worked through both of those relationships. Both men are incredible. They've taught me a ton. They've helped me be who I am today in this field, for sure. And I'm no longer kind of needing that kind of relationship because I have myself in a different kind of way. So I can show up as an equal now as opposed to a one down position. And that feels a lot better.
How long did you work with Bessel for?
I still work with Bessel. I'm going to see him in a couple weeks in Oxford. We're doing a Master Series conference together. I spoke at his trauma conference in May in Boston. So I have a nice relationship with him. I started working with him in 1992.
1992?
Yeah.
It's like 30-something
do
years.
We have to really do the math.
Yeah.
Long time. At some point he wanted me to marry. I was the first. We talk about this a lot. I was the first gay man he ever knew outwardly, because I was the protege. It's like, oh my God, I'm the psychiatrist at his trauma center. He's like, Frank, I want you to marry my daughter. I want you to take over my trauma center. I'm like, great, this is awesome, And I had a wife at the time. But then I came out and it was like, damn, this really messed up my plans, But he had high hopes for me, but I had another path.
Yeah.
And I talked to his daughter a lot. We kind of joke about it. She's like, yeah, thanks, Frank. You kind of helped me pave the way to be me, not what my dad wanted me to be either. So thanks for your help because,
I think obviously his book, The Body Keeps the Score, one of the most successful books of all time.
100%.
And in many ways around this topic of trauma, while it's always
Yes.
been there, that book for some reason felt like some sort of great awakening
Yes.
in our culture.
That's right.
And I mean, I've just never seen anything like it in terms of I think it's 9 years later, it's still on the top 10 of no book does that.
That's exactly right.
And so as we're talking about trauma, why do you think the book exploded like it did and had such staying power?
Couple things. One is, so we look at the evolution of anything. It could be a marginalized community. It could be sexual orientation, Black Lives Matter, any marginalized group. There's this women. There's this ebb and flow. When I first met Bessel, Judy Herman and him were these two iconic people in Boston, trauma centers. There was the Women's Trauma Center and the Men's Trauma Center. And back then, the women's movement was a big deal. And there was all these, women standing up for women's rights and all this kind of stuff. And so there's this ebb and flow around movement forward for marginalized groups and then backtracking, right? And I was there. I've been in a supervision group with Bessel since around 1992. We have these monthly supervision groups for years. We stopped around the pandemic, but I was there when he was writing that book. We were meeting monthly, and it was like his life's work. And I think there was this way that the book came out, and then culture and society got traumatized through the pandemic. And so everybody related with trauma in this way that's like, oh my goodness, there's this mental health crisis in teenagers right now that's crazy, right? And so the world was ready for trauma awareness at the same time that this book kind of was out there. And people were baking sourdough bread and reading Bessel's book during the pandemic. I mean, it really exploded during that time, and it stayed in a big way. So, and there is this back and forth around movement forward, movement back, movement forward, because there's a backlash too. Not me, I don't have trauma. I was working with Bessel, and the false memory people were attacking him and looking at every single way to get against him. Do you know what I mean? So there is the culture and society, we one step forward, two steps back kind of thing. And so we're ready. We're ready. The world and the culture, like, it's interesting. I also think about each generation and what they hold around trauma. These Gen Zs are a traumatized group of people. You know, they're like, oh my God, I sneezed, I have a trauma history, like I can't go to school today. Like they're overly identified with trauma. And I'm not saying this even in a negative way, honestly. It's like they grew up in a trauma. They grew up in a pandemic. And they're holding trauma in a very different way than millennials do, than Gen X's or baby boomers do. So I think each culture holds a different piece around this evolution of trauma. You know, I've created this company, Trauma Informed Media, and bringing trauma awareness to the general public. People are ready for it now in a way that they haven't been before. People can identify trauma, and on the same front, nobody said, not me, I don't have a trauma history, not me, not me. I don't use the word trauma in the general public as much as I use the word overwhelming life experience.
Yeah.
Okay, when you look at media, I'm thrilled that Ted Lasso is coming out with a 4th season. Okay, look at the show Ted Lasso, look at the show The Bear. I don't know if you've seen The Bear. These are trauma-laden shows without ever the mention of the word trauma. So I think culture and society is like, yes, we're all hurting. Yes, this is a problem, but don't call it trauma. Show me and let me live through it vicariously and identify with it.
Yeah, it's almost like you're I think you're just hitting on something that is so true of our culture right now.
Yeah.
Which is like, yes, you said in your book that 70% of people will experience a traumatic event in their life. So there is trauma.
Yeah.
But then, you mentioned these movements that happen. It's like there is this overwhelming truth that exists within it, but then you start seeing it go in these ways where then you have people that, like the false memory people will deny that like trauma even exists, but then you have people then that start over-identifying with trauma.
100%.
I think one thing for me that really stuck out when I read his book specifically was like, I've never seen such direct evidence of evil.
Yes.
Perhaps what's been historically known as like biblical sin or something like that in my life, because and what that evil does to people psychologically, physiologically, even on a neurochemical level. And so it contextualized for me like what like real trauma is. Yeah. And so as we kind of flesh that out, what does that word mean? And so like what if you were to define what trauma is, what exactly is trauma?
Everybody asks me this question. It's very common. And I love that people are curious about it now, because that question wasn't around before. Not me was more what it was. Now it's like, what is it? Do I have it? Right? There's a couple different ways I think about it. One is frequency, intensity, and duration. It's like, how often? What's the intensity of it? What's the duration? How long does it last? Because there's this cumulative effect that we carry. That's kind of one thing I think about. I differentiate, and it's an overwhelming fear, helplessness, and horror is another common definition. Does it have an element of fear Is there a helplessness involved, and is there horror or terror, right? So you're looking at these degrees and the longevity of that. I think about trauma is what happened to you. It's the moment, it's the experience, it's the event. More important is the response. The response to the trauma is almost more important than what happened to you, because the what happened to you, I believe you can release. It's not who you are, it's what happened to you. It's a car accident, it's a yelling, it's being shamed, it's being beaten, it's being raped. It's what, there's all the, we go through overwhelming life experiences. I don't know anybody who hasn't. I don't know anybody who hasn't had something that's been overwhelming for them. You know, what they do with it, first time, that 70%, we usually recover. Second, third, fourth, fifth, so much harder to recover from. So for me, it's the what happened, but how you respond and how other people respond is really what's critical. You can become suicidal, you can start doing drugs, you become a world famous trauma expert. Like, there's all these different adaptations to what happened and how people respond to it.
Do you like the language that's becoming popular around big T traumas
No.
and little T traumas?
Wait, let me finish your question.
No.
I hate it. I know.
The question, yeah.
I hate it. I know. I hate it. Okay? And the reason that I hate it is, who's assigning the big T, little t? Who? An outsider, not the insider. This is why I talked about perception. Because you can have 3 kids in a family, and they could be experiencing similar things. And one kid, it's a little t, and another kid, it's a big T. And that's the truth. So for me to say, oh, you were called fat, that's a little t, oh, you were raped as a big T, is an outside assignment of the impact it has on an individual. Okay? And so we can't determine the impact because there's so many factors that go into why being bullied is huge for one kid and not for another.
Related to what you just said about the different characteristics of trauma,
100%.
which I think it makes a lot more sense to look at what you just defined as the overwhelming characteristics versus to just kind of outwardly judge.
Oh, don't be sad. Oh, that's not, you know how much we project onto people?
Yeah.
It's ridiculous, you know? So we're assigning whether this is big T, little t. And, you know, this brings up this issue of resilience for me because it's fascinating. I think we do not have a handle on resilience at all. I don't think we know what the hell it is. Like, why did I get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, study, become a Harvard-trained psychiatrist, and now I'm here doing podcasts and TV appearances because of my trauma history? And why is somebody else, you know, on the street, homeless, and lost everything in their life?
That's the big question. I think that's the big question. What people are interested in is like what differentiates those who end up.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And I do not think we know the answer to that. Okay, people talk about resilience, and I don't think we've done enough. You know, Angela Duckworth talks about grit, and like we can teach resilience and all this kind of stuff. I don't think that's clear yet. You know, for me, what I hold around resilience is there's this combination of, I'm going to call it soul or temperament. We're born with something. You know this when you are a parent and you have 3 kids and they are all different. So there's something you come in with that is yours, and environment plays a role. Environment plays a role to some degree, for sure. I did feel love from my mother, even though it was really complicated love. I think that had something to do with something. My grandfather, I write about my grandfather. He saw me as special. So I think being loved is key. Like for me, love and connection heals trauma. I'm pretty clear about that. And I will also say love and connection can prevent trauma, right? So I think you need love and connection in certain kinds of ways. And I think there's temperament around how one person does something with it and another person does something totally different with it.
Yeah, I mean, the more I looked into trauma and research trauma, I think what you said, like, there's so much nuance in the situation. So if
Yes.
someone is repeatedly raped,
Yeah.
like let's just say they're home in their house and it happens to be their sibling or their father or something else, and they can't leave and they're repeatedly raped, is not probably the same thing as you were in a car accident one time, and
Right.
like there might be different responses to that.
Yes.
And so in terms of going through an extremely stressful situation and coming out like on the other side, there's this idea of I think you mentioned your book, a critical incident stress debriefing, like telling someone how
Yeah.
important it is and responding to it. Like,
Yeah.
what would you say about an immediate, like something
Yeah.
traumatic has happened to you in the days or weeks after, the way that you respond? What would you say about that?
Yeah. So I don't think we're great with acute trauma yet, right? And I think we'll get better at it. We do know a lot of information. Like I was here during September 11th.
Yeah.
And I came rushing in and I had my light bar for EMDR and we were going to do EMDR. I had my prescription pad. I was going to give people medication and all this kind of stuff. And I was part of a critical incident debriefing team. We were bussed in from Boston and we were working with people in groups. And what we know now is that when you put a bunch of people together and talk about their trauma over and over again, you increase the encoding of traumatic memory. So all these like school shootings and they rush all these people in and they have them talk, not helpful, even harmful. Okay, so we know this now in a way that we didn't know this a decade ago.
That's
So
confusing to me though, because you would think that we'll
here-
talk it at some level, maybe down the line, or
there's a sweet spot.
yeah.
This is what we know now. There's a sweet spot. So being, raped at night and then coming down and sitting at the kitchen table over and over and over again and nobody saying anything, harmful. Talking about it ad nauseum, what happened, harmful. There's a sweet spot around love and connection and being able to say what happened, speaking your truth is important. But we're getting better at what is that right mixture. So that's where our field is at. They're revamping the whole critical incident debriefing protocol because of this new information. So, what people don't understand, like in acute trauma, I've been studying the neurophysiology of acute PTSD and dissociation for a really long time. And there's a lot of physiological things that happen chemically with cortisol and glutamate and norepinephrine, that there's this period, in the acute aftermath of trauma, we need to normally process or consolidate a traumatic memory. And too much intervention interferes with the normal consolidation process of a trauma. So there's symptoms of PTSD are normal within the first 30 days. You don't rush in to get rid of them because you can actually interfere with things. There was 2 studies I'll talk about. One is Sandy McFarland did this study in Australia with car accident victims coming out of an ER, and they were given benzodiazepines, Valium, Ativan, immediately after, and they had increased PTSD. Okay, it's because benzodiazepines interfere with memory reconsolidation, so they interfered with the normal processing of the trauma. So you never should give benzos, Ativan to someone for acute trauma. We know this now. Most people don't know this. Okay, so there's one, giving a drug to interfere. That's problematic. The other point was doing EMDR. Okay, I was one of the first people trained in EMDR. I was part of the first EMDR versus Prozac study.
Can you just briefly explain what that is?
Yeah,
EMDR?
eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. It was one of the first trauma treatments that kind of came on the scene. Bessel met Francine Shapiro, who was the founder of that model. We did the first Prozac versus EMDR study. I was the psychiatrist who gave everybody the Prozac. EMDR was more effective, right? And EMDR is processing traumatic memory, right brain, left brain, right brain, left brain, right? It helps process traumatic memory. And the lawyers were so pissed at us because we were processing traumatic memory to the point that people acutely were able to not have symptoms anymore after an acute trauma. It's very effective for acute trauma because you're helping your brain process. And they're like, our witnesses suck. Like, we're losing all of our cases now. And so we had to make people sign waivers. Like, I understand that doing this treatment may interfere with my court case, because they were better. They're like, yeah, I had a car accident, or yes, I was raped, and I'm better now. And they're like, this is not winning our cases. Do you know what I mean? So there is a way to process trauma that's safe and healthy and effective to prevent the development of PTSD. And there is things that are harmful, and we're getting much better at that. There's been much more focus on treating trauma than preventing it. And I think our field needs
universally helpful versus universally harmful in the wake of an acute trauma.
Yeah.
What are those things?
Love and connection, universally helpful. The Boston bombing, September 11th, the whole world responds. Services, people, love, money. The more we can do that, the more we prevent the development of trauma, because we're helping that critical period of processing a trauma. You've got to let it happen. Too much intervention, too much talking, isolation, harmful for traumatic experiences. I came back, it's about almost a year ago now, from Cambodia and Vietnam and China. Last year I was doing some teaching out there, and I was so struck with the Vietnamese people and the Cambodian folks who have gone through such horrific experiences, and the genocide in Cambodia is just like so painful. And to see these people so loving and kind was remarkable. Like, how could you be that way? And they had each other. There's this way that they stuck together, and they had each other in the midst of these horrific things. We met one of 20,000 people in a killing field, one of 5 survivors. This guy's a kind, loving person. I'm like, how could you be that way? He was like, all I cared about was being able to help when I get out. And I just kept saying over and over and over again, I'm going to help when I get out. I'm going to help when I get out. So there is this way that connection is our resilience, our special sauce, if you will, in regards to these horrific events. And you see the temples right next to the killing fields. So you see like love, kindness, hope next to evil. That's where I learned evil exists, And so there is this juxtaposition, and I think we have to be a little bit more clear about what we're offering when people are in overwhelming life experience.
That's really interesting, because I mean the thing with trauma going on and exposure on that is coinciding with the loneliness epidemic as well.
100%.
And so we came from hunter and gatherer ancient societies where we were together. We were together all the time, and we had people around us. Versus now we're scattering, individualism. We feel alone, and so a lot of people. And even like you said earlier, do I matter, right? And so like not having those built-in support systems, I think what you're saying is kind of amplifies accelerates the trauma.
I was just talking, on a TV show yesterday around these kids going back to school and screen time, right? And there is this perception of connection with technology, when in fact it's highlighting comparison and difference. Because when you are connected in social media, you're constantly comparing yourself. Better, worse, I don't have that. I have, so it's not actual connection. It's comparison, not connection, right? And that doesn't foster healing or resilience. So it's a real problem. Like, talking about banning phones in schools, I'm like, yes, please. Yes, please. I have 2 boys, 16 and 20, and my youngest is on the spectrum. and he's like, technology is his like world, and he's like on VR, and he's talking like, I'm talking to somebody in Germany, leave me alone. Like, so he's got these like connections all over the world that are all virtual. He's never met any of these people, and in some ways that's great for him because I think it's an easier way for him to connect, being on the spectrum. But I have these rules now. I'm like, we sit at a table, we go to the restaurant, we're going for a walk, phones are gone. Phones are gone. You know, setting boundaries, right? Everybody says set boundaries, and then parents are on their phone. I have the most fascinating conversations with this kid when I force him off social media. Like, I'm like, you are a brilliant, interesting kid, and you don't know that when people are on social media. And now he doesn't fight it anymore. And then his world opens up, and I love talking to him. Let's go for a walk. I don't want to go for a walk. I'm like, let's go for a walk. I want to hear what's going on in your head because it's amazing. And it is back to connection. You know, flip phones are becoming popular now. There's a resurgence, a beginning of a resurgence. I'm like, thank you, because maybe we just phone and text and that's it.
Yeah.
Right. So I think, just like, excuse me for saying this, like this generation and all these like records are popular now. I'm like, hello, people. Like, I was of the generation where we had the record player. Now you think it's cool and retro. Like, good for you. You're like, recycle the record player. I'm happy for you all. Great. I think that's just going to happen with social media and the phones. I think these kids are going to get into this, like, it's so hip and cool to not have it. And I think that's going to be super important. I really do.
That's good.
Because connection is really what's lacking.
So any other universal helpful things to do with trauma?
Yeah, no, it's just be present, love and connection. Like, really, it's that simple and it's that important.
What about universally?
And it's that hard to do.
What about universally harmful?
Trying to do too much, trying to tell somebody what they should feel and what they shouldn't feel. Don't be sad. Don't be angry. This will get over. You know, it'll be, you know, the past is the past. Like, it really is holding space for someone who's in something overwhelming is really hard because it activates our pain. I can't highlight enough how difficult that is.
Yeah, because you have to like acquire it in some sense of like you
feel yours.
Yeah,
so when you're with somebody who's feeling theirs, you feel yours. You don't feel theirs. People get confused by this. You feel yours. So if you're sitting here telling me about a horrible death that you just experienced in your family, I'm going to be like, yeah, but don't worry, it gets better. Because if I'm just like with you, I'm going to feel my horrible experience. And that's what people don't want to do. So it's very difficult to truly be with somebody in the horrific because it makes us feel ours.
Yeah.
That's not easy.
This is like a really tough question. But I guarantee you there's somebody listening to this right now that's in an ongoing traumatic situation like being abused.
Why do you say it's a tough question?
I'm saying it's a tough question because as a child, you were not able to escape your being in your parents' household until you were older. And so there are probably some people listening to this right now that are in an ongoing traumatic situation and feel like they can't escape, or they literally can't escape.
Literally can't.
And so what do you feel like the best thing a person can do in that situation? I'm saying it's tough because they feel trapped.
You have yourself. This is what I want to say to people. You have yourself. And I don't want to underestimate the importance of that. And that's what I ended up doing, was I had me, because I didn't have my mother in a way that was really safe, and I didn't have my father in a way that was really safe. And what I ended up doing was walling off me. I had me. Like, I was disconnected from my truth, but it was me alone, and that saved me, honestly. It's like, you have you, and you have the capacity to survive horrible things, because that's an important piece for me. Like this is what I'm kind like dissociation is a protection, is what I'm saying. It really is. Like you've got you, and know that you have you, and know that you are strong enough to survive a lot. And that's important in moments when people are suicidal or people are being inundated. It's important to know that you have you. And it's not the healthiest long-term strategy,
To dissociate.
but it's a lifesaver in the moment. It's a lifesaver in the moment to kind of have the capacity to be with you alone and leave what's happening around you is life-saving. Like I dissociated a lot. I disconnected a lot. There's this one, I remember reading this book in my residency called Soul Murder by Leonard Chengold. I was like, that didn't happen to me. That's what I thought. That didn't I didn't even read the book. I'm like, that did not happen to me. He did not murder my soul. So I had me in this way that I was walled off and nobody can get to me. Now, I had a lot of dysfunctional relationships as an adult because that doesn't breed good intimacy. Okay, we're gonna talk about that later. But I had me and nobody was gonna fucking get there. So I walled myself off in a protective way. I was like, he did not murder my soul. And that's the survivor in us all. So these kids or adults who are in these trap situations, I want them to know you do have you, and you can protect you. And it's not the greatest long-term strategy, but it is a great in the moment strategy. Kids were out playing soccer, getting the ice cream from the ice cream truck in the summer, and I was fantasizing about being an adult. I couldn't wait to be an adult. I just was like, I'm going to be an adult because I can make my own decisions and I could do what I want, where I want, when I want to do it. That's what I used to fantasize about as a kid.
Reminds me of this it's on Netflix or Hulu or one of these channels, but it was talking about these influencers online. And so there was this channel on YouTube where this woman kind of rallied all these kids or something, and she had these kids doing these performances on this YouTube channel. And it looked like this very wholesome like performance with all these kids. And so I think some of them were her biological children, or I don't remember the story completely, but this channel grew to like maybe 1 million, 2 million, very, very popular. But then it was exposed that like behind the scenes, what was happening in that household was like there was all this abuse going on. They're basically like slaves to content production, all of that stuff. And they were like, I watched this a few years ago, and then there was a couple moments when those kids tried to break free and like weren't able to. Eventually, someone got tipped off or whatever. She got arrested. These kids got freed, whatever. But it was just an example of like this ongoing situation 100%. Of like you're kind of trapped in that situation.
100%.
Yeah.
What is her name? Blanchard, the girl from Munchausen recently that's been in the media. Gypsy Rose Blanchard. She was in the media not too long ago. She was in prison for 8 or 10 years for killing her mother. But she got off on manslaughter. She did it with a boyfriend because her mother did all these horrific things. Munchausen by proxy is a disorder where parents make kids sick so that parents get attention by the healthcare system, right? And she tried to let people know a couple times, but it's too scary. It really is too scary for kids. Quiet on the Set is a recent thing that just came out. All these child stars who look like, oh my God, Amanda Bynes, all this kind of stuff. And what goes on behind closed doors is a whole other story. It happens more often than we think. I'll tell you in my own personal situation around this, I have a couple of my cousins, I gave an early copy of the book. I'm like, I want you guys to just see this because I want you to know it's gonna come out. They were shocked. My cousins were shocked.
They had no idea.
Frankie, I'm so sorry, my one cousin said. We wanted to be your family. We thought you guys were the best family. I wanted to be a kid in your family so badly. I had no idea, okay? This is my cousin saying this to me. When we would have family parties, yelling and screaming and hitting, the doorbell rang. Hi, Uncle Jerry. Hi, Uncle Francine, Auntie Francine. Hello, we're here. Like we knew what we needed to do to present well. Otherwise, there was hell to pay on the back end. So kids learn quickly what to do and what not to do to get hurt. And this happens a lot. So there's a lot of people that don't know what goes on behind closed doors. And kids think it's normal. This is your normal. This is just what you do. This is what everybody does. Because kids don't have a context of different.
Well, let me ask you the reverse of that question then. What about someone who is inflicting trauma that would be listening to this right now? What would you say to that person?
So this is a very important piece of this whole purpose for me in my life is the acknowledgement of perpetrator energy as well as victim energy. Okay? And this is maybe not the most popular view, but I don't care anymore. I'm 61. I can say what I want. I don't care what people think anymore, which is kind of nice. It's a little bit freeing. But everybody's a perpetrator. And everybody's been harmed, in my view. So people who inflict harm have had harm inflicted upon them. And it's a more adaptive, protective mechanism. So when you inflict harm on somebody, you're actually protecting the parts of you that have been victimized. And this was really important for me to talk about in this memoir. You know, I talk about a lot of things that I did that weren't so great. And it was really important to say, like, if you've been victimized, you internalize perpetrator energy. You can't not. So we all have harmers, and we've all been harmed. And you know what? Culture and society is not happy to hear this. This is why we have the political divide that we have in our country, in my view. We're othering people so we don't have to look at our shadow. And the sooner people get this message, the sooner we're going to be able to heal from trauma. And I learned this, and I did not learn this in psychotherapy school. I did not learn this in therapy training. I learned this in my life when my dad was dying, and I really healed enough of what happened to me to see the victim in him and then be able to put his perpetrator energy in perspective. And I'm going to use the F word, and I say it like that, forgiveness, because people really don't like that word. I was able to forgive him and actually love him for all that he did and that he didn't do, because I saw the complexity in him, and I let go of enough of what I was carrying. This was the shocker for me. It was shocking. Then I started forgiving myself for all that I had done. But you can't really forgive yourself if you're gonna other somebody for what they've done to you. It doesn't work that way. Like, how are you? You're okay? I'm okay for yelling at my kids when I'm gonna hate my father for yelling at me. Like, it kind of doesn't work that way. So we've got to hold that complexity. And again, I don't know if the world's ready for this, but I'm ready to talk about it and teach it, because we're all, we're all, you know, it's like there's not that much dirt on me anymore. I cheated on my wife. Like, I did yell at my kids. I hit my one once. I'm like, I had some pretty fucked up relationships. I'm like, I did some bad things in my life, you know, and until we can recognize that and acknowledge that, we're going to keep like, you're bad, I'm good.
It's a very biblical take, in the sense of like that we have these two natures of like all good and bad. I mean, you use the F word, forgiveness, which is like a central theme in that, but just the fact that we acknowledging that there are good parts of us that we could recognize. Like, how could people do such like really amazing acts of love and kindness,
That's right.
and then simultaneously at the same time And I think it's just amazing that you are pointing that out, even about where our culture is at right now and the stuff that goes back and forth, because there is kind of a self-righteousness
Yes,
in
100%.
in that, like, I'm good, you're bad type of mentality about a lot of this stuff. And I think that's amazing, the cycle that you see a abuser in. And I'm sure if we unpacked any abuser's backstory, it's literally like they got sexually abused.
Yep,
And so now they're
that's right.
perpetrating a cycle.
100%. Like, I'll say a couple things. One is problem with, it's so interesting that you say biblical, that word really hit me.
Yeah.
I grew up Catholic,
Yeah.
so religion is complicated for me for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
But all of what I teach comes from elsewhere. This is not my stuff. This is not my stuff. It's through all the experience that I've gone through, and I'm receiving a lot of information to bring to the world. I know that. Like, I don't hold on to it because I'm a kind of more of a channel. So it comes from somewhere else, and I think these are the lessons we all need to learn. Forgiveness, people push too prematurely. That I'm pretty clear about. Forgive, 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 forgive. You can't forgive until you release what you're carrying, in my view. I talk about forgiveness after healing trauma, not before, because it doesn't work. It doesn't work. So I think we have some work to do around true forgiveness, and, releasing what you carry about somebody else is really freeing.
Yeah.
It's really freeing. So I think we have work to do, but I'm glad to be part of the conversation. And I don't think these ideas are mine.
Yeah.
And they're not new ideas. They've been around for a while, haven't they? But we still need to learn them.
So, if acute trauma hits and, and we're not processing it in the most ideal way possible, we're not getting love and connection. I read your other book, Transcending Trauma. And so you outlined 5 different categories of trauma. And so I kind of want to preface this. Some people are like, why do we need all these categories of trauma? And so why are these helpful, and how might they help someone inform what they do next?
Yeah, it's interesting. So that's already outdated.
Yeah.
It's not 5 anymore. I've really expanded that list, interestingly enough, which I'm kind of excited about. I keep adding these categories because of our awareness of systemic and global trauma. It's important from my perspective. It would be much easier if we only went through an acute event. That's one type of trauma. 70% of the people do. It's so much more common, so let me back up a little bit. Acute event, be great if that's all we had. Some people who can't recover from an acute event get chronic PTSD. That's a second category where the symptoms persist, right? Unfortunately, more often than not, people are in chronic relational trauma. That's complex PTSD, different category. Ongoing relational violation.
Which is what we just described.
This is what we're talking about over and over. And every time your dad's drunk, every time your mother yells at you, every time she's depressed and gone, you lose a safe parent, right? And those are these violations, relational violations over and over and over again. That's much more common than we know. Bessel Kolk tried for most of his career to get complex PTSD, or relational violation, on the map. And it's been a very political, very political battle. It's still not in the DSM. So then there's relational, but then there's also what I call attachment and developmental trauma. People don't know the impact of attachment wounding very early on, before language. When you're left alone as a baby, screaming and crying for food, when you're not picked up. There's a lot of relational early attachment trauma that people carry in its implicit memory with no conscious awareness of. That's what attraction is, which is kind of a messed up thing. But
which dates back to attachment theory, John Bowlby, all that work.
100%. We're seeking people in our life to love, to heal our attachment wounding, and most people are not conscious of this. So there's a whole category of attachment and developmental trauma, different things happening at different developmental stages, and how that affects us. You know what I mean? Then there's institutional trauma, religious trauma, cultural trauma, medical trauma, and we haven't been paying much attention to that. the impact of being an altar boy and abused by a priest, or being in an institution and having the people in power being abusive. Like, that has an effect. Cultural trauma has a huge effect. Society and culture, Black Lives Matter, all these things. Me Too movement, there's all these cultural, societal issues that are huge. Family legacy trauma. Everybody has family legacy burdens growing up in whatever family you grew up in, whether it's ethnic or whether it's just the this is what boys are supposed to be strong, girls are supposed to be accommodating, or we drink because we're Irish, or Italians are blah, blah, blah. Like, we all carry family legacy trauma. These are messages that get encoded that aren't even ours, that we live with, that aren't ours, but we encode them as if they are. Those can be released. And then there's global trauma. Sorry, you can't say you don't have a trauma history because like the whole world is traumatized. So I'm really loving the systemic, I'm loving the different categories of trauma and expanding this view. It used to be just war trauma. You know, PTSD was all about war, and it's so much different. And the reason that it's important is because we don't treat them all the same. When I was in Vietnam and Cambodia, I was learning about systemic. How does a country heal from a genocide? Like, a very different way of healing than how does somebody who grew up with an alcoholic father heal from that trauma, right? So there are different, and we're not great at it yet, but there are different things you need to do for different types of trauma. So these categorizations are important because, and it brings awareness. You know, most people don't know about family legacy, transgenerational trauma. It's a thing. You know, it gets passed down in genetics.
Yeah, the thing about labels I think is so interesting is like people like, no, we don't need labels, but I'm like, okay, if you are about like to have a heart attack, would you like, let's not label it you're about to have a heart attack. Let's label it nothing, or just some general issues happening, you know? And so
labeling is good and bad. It's hard, you know, some people use it as an identity. That's not helpful. They use it to stay there, but it's also informative and gives a context.
Yeah, it's identifying the problem.
Yeah, so I think there's a way that we need to hold both. You know, there's people that, I don't have trauma, and they have horrific trauma histories. That's labeling in a way that's not helpful. Or, oh my God, I sneezed, I have a trauma. You know, so it's how one uses it and for what purpose.
How have you seen people can over-identify with trauma?
Yeah, I've worked in this field for a long time, and some people really do hold it as an identity.
What does that mean?
Like, I'm a trauma survivor. I have a trauma history. It is who I am. We know there's science that shows us how our sense of identity and our sense of self gets linked to trauma. 2 parts of the brain, periaductal gray and the default mode network. We know that trauma and sense of self gets linked. Okay, so there's neuroscience behind it. But when people identify this is who I am, it's very hard to differentiate. And I'm always saying this, who you are is not what happened to you. You can release what happened to you and be more of who you authentically are. And when people blend them, this is who I am, they over-identify. Some people stay in hospitals and want to go back and forth. They're like these rapid cyclers back into the hospital because they get love and connection, or they get taken seriously in a way that they don't outside of the hospital. So we've got to be careful about the identity in some ways because it can be harmful. And people are walking around like, hey, dude, like you got a trauma history. You need to look into this. Not me. I'm tough and strong. Like, yeah, you do. Like, what do you think? What do you think your relationship, history is related to? What do you think the drinking's about? How come you can't hold down a job? Like, you know what I mean? All the responses to your trauma without identifying the origins is a problem. So you got to find out where people are on that spectrum, right?
So you have that spectrum, the categories.
Yeah.
So in terms of like symptoms that you're struggling with one of those things, there's some mental disorders or conditions like bipolar, for example. I think it may be a little bit more obvious than that you might struggle. Or if you're having mania or something like that.
Guess what?
What?
Never met somebody with bipolar disorder who doesn't have a trauma history.
Wow.
Sorry. Yeah, I'm not doing a research study, so don't quote me on that in that way. But and I'm serious about that. I've never met somebody with bipolar disorder who doesn't have a trauma history. It's a flight.
Are you saying that bipolar could be potentially a reaction to
Yeah,
trauma?
I do. I think there's a biological component, and I think there's an emotional component.
I've never heard that before.
Yeah, I think
It's interesting
both.
take.
I think it's both. Psychotic symptoms are an adaptation to get away.
So schizophrenia, would you say the same thing?
Yeah. There's a biological component. I'm not downplaying the significance of genes in biology. I'm not saying that doesn't exist. I'm saying that's not the only thing. If you're paranoid, guess what? Paranoia is like the best antidote for loneliness. You're going to have somebody watch you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That's a pretty good solution. So there's these I'm always looking at a psychotic adaptation as to what is the function of that symptom. What's the positive intention? Same thing with mania. Like, wouldn't you rather think you're Jesus Christ and spend $60,000 than deal with the fact that you're alone or you've just been sexually violated? So it might not be the healthiest adaptation, but it's an adaptation.
Do you think it's intuitive? So there are these symptoms of trauma that are more obvious, right? So like what you described, the freak out that you described at the beginning. But do you think it's intuitively obvious always that to someone that they're traumatized?
It's one of the things that I want to bring awareness to. This is this company, Trauma Informed Media, around trauma awareness, because most people don't know that their affairs are due to their trauma history. Most people don't know that their drinking is due to their trauma history. Most people don't know that they're over-exercising.
Like their sexual affairs?
100%.
Yeah.
Any kind of affairs.
Yeah.
Really. Their eating issues are due to their trauma history. Like, people don't know. Yelling at their kids, trauma. Like, people don't know that. They think about the symptoms of PTSD, like flashbacks, numbing avoidance. Like, there's these categories, but it's so much broader than that. That's why I said the trauma is almost not as important as the reaction, because I want people to be aware that these responses and the overworking. This is a weird thing to say. I don't know if I've said this out loud before. You don't become the president of the United States unless you have really significant issues to overcome. Like, that's a really crazy adaptation, that you want to run the world. Like, it's huge overreaction, right? Think about it. Like, I'm not saying every president or leader of a country has a trauma history per se, but you want to look at these adaptations and what is driving that? What's driving it? My brother, like, I became like this trauma expert. He hunts everything. He is an avid hunter. He kills whatever he can kill. And him and I joke about it, And that was he's like, I'm going to be powerful. He carries all the time. He lives in Mississippi. Like, we couldn't be more different. But he's like, nobody's going to fuck with me. I'm going to protect myself no matter what. And I'm going to overpower anything that comes in my way. You know what I mean? So I don't want to pathologize everything, but I also want us to look at our maladaptive, overused reactions, and I want people to start seeing that those are adaptations to trauma, and most people don't want to look at that.
There's some like physical stuff that happens too. I mean, Lady Gaga has been outspoken about her own sexual abuse, and then the fibromyalgia that came from it. Is that
huge?
Can you explain the link, like between the physical pain?
Fibromyalgia, huge connection with trauma. Eating disorders, huge connection with trauma. We did a study on rheumatoid arthritis when I was running a foundation, not-for-profit foundation, and we saw that rheumatoid arthritis was a trauma reaction. Literally, when you were working with the parts of you that were seizing up your joints, we heard over and over again, I'm keeping you stuck in your chair so you won't get up and take care of other people because you do a bad job of taking care of us.
Mm.
So literally, people's joints were seized up so they couldn't caretake somebody else. And it was an attempt at our body to take care of us. Gabor Mate, who's a friend of mine, like every single medical problem is related to trauma, and I have to agree with him. I really do. I've been coughing throughout this interview. I know I've got stuff going on. I've always like, what am I not saying? What am I not speaking? Do I also have an immune condition? Because my dad had rheumatoid arthritis and I've got a hyperreactive immune system? Yes. So it doesn't have to be an either or. There's a biological component and an emotional component to most everything.
That's good. Yeah, and then some of the discoveries is about what happens to the brain on trauma was just absolutely mind-blowing. And so when I read Bessel's book and going through all these studies, and so I think that we did a post about this actually about probably 8 months ago, and I kind of want to break down some of these things for you because it kind of shows the horror of trauma, because literally what happens in your brain.
Yeah.
And so in some of the cases of trauma, the Broca's area of the brain, which regulates speech, just like the end result, it just shuts down. So the end result is that you can't put your thoughts or feelings into words. So you can
100%.
explain what's happening there with that one?
Yeah. This is the big disconnect in trauma, is there is a way that, and so when I teach about the neurobiology of PTSD, there's kind of two main responses and reactions to trauma. One is fight or flight, holy shit, I'm freaking out. And the other is dissociation and disconnection. Those are kind of our two most extreme ways. And we know all the neurobiology. And so when we're in fight or flight, certain parts of the brain, because of the stress chemicals, get shut off or taken offline. The prefrontal cortex, the hippocampus, Broca's area. In holy crap, fight or flight, they get taken offline. So you have no capacity to put words to your experience. You literally can't. Your brain is not functioning in those moments. So we don't have the capacity to down-regulate, to soothe our emotions, to recover in our body physiologically. And we cannot put words to our experience because these areas are shut off. And these are pretty well known. And that's what ends up happening. Now, on the other side of the story, the shutdown, the dissociation, shame, numbing, is the exact opposite. When you get to this point of what we call life threat, Stephen Porges terms the dorsal branch of the parasympathetic nervous system. There's a different there's a different trajectory in the amygdala, the fear center of the brain, which goes to the ventral tegmental tract, which activates the escape avoidance tract. There, our brains are overly active and shut everything down because we're in survival mode. We're going to die. Can't think, can't feel, can't have any body sensation. So you have these two, holy crap, where certain parts of the brain can't function to down-regulate or calm you down. So you're full of emotion and you're full of physical sensation. The other side, it's like, we're going to die, shut it all down. If you get into fight, flight, freeze, submit, it's more submit zone. So it's like conserve all your energy because we're going to die. And that's where you don't have capacity for kind of anything. So we do know how this physiologically works and then how to work with it differently now. So yeah, Bessel, and that's one of the things that Bessel brought to the general public, is this book that in a pretty user-friendly way explains a lot of this stuff in a way people had no awareness of.
So then the whole brain shutting down, but then there's other instances, if I'm getting this right, where you have the right brain, left brain, emotional brain, rational brain. So the rational brain just completely shut down, and then the only thing that was lighting up was the emotional brain. And so is that kind of a variant of the...
Yeah, it is. It's a little bit simplistic because it's more than right brain and left brain. When you look at the circuitry of trauma, there's a lot of parts of the brain. There's a lot of players in that neural network. Right brain, left brain is important. It's a part of the story, but it's not the whole story. But that's where EMDR, we think, does work on, because right brain and left brain should be communicating together. And there's this structure in the middle called the corpus callosum, which we think is defective in some ways for trauma, where right brain and left brain are not communicating. So you can't think and feel at the same time. That's a part of the story where that network gets kind of disconnected. And so you can some people are like totally intellectual and can tell you every single detail about it, and they have no access to emotion. It's one
Which
side.
is kind of weird.
Yeah,
probably if you're sitting
it's
with
kind of weird,
with
but
a
it
therapist,
happens to a lot of people.
Yeah.
You do couples work, and this is such a stereotype, but I'm going to say it anyways. Like, if you do couples work with a traditional straight couple, and this is such an oversimplification, so pardon me, she's so hysterical, he's on the spectrum, right? All she does is feel, and all he does is think. Like, that's an overgeneralization, obviously. But there are those two poles, and it doesn't have to be gender specific at all. But some people are all emotion, and they can't put words to their experience at all.
Yeah.
And other people are like, let me tell you about the amygdala and the hippocampus and the blah, 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 blah. And they have no access to their feelings. I used to be one of those. Totally smart, Harvard-trained psychiatrist with no access to my emotion. I was, and that's where I got overdeveloped.
It's all like coping mechanisms.
100%. It's all coping
Even what you're
mechanisms.
seeing on the brain scans is
Yes.
like a physical manifestation of a coping mechanism.
100%. That's exactly right.
So
yeah,
I love that. I mean, I love that you mentioned, that you used to be that person, because I think obviously people are interested in like what healing from trauma looks like. And so that's why your story is so fascinating, is you've not only studied all this stuff, but as we talked about, like you've been through it. And so I kind of want to take through the healing process, those things side by side. I think that like you had a post about this recently. Obviously, there are those camp of people who talk about, let's just move on. We don't need to revisit the past.
Yes.
And so just getting past that mentality, what would you say about that?
So this is one of the things that's also separate from the whole forgiveness thing, and we're all perpetrators and victims, that are important to me. I'm in this Trauma Institute, this kind of integrated trauma center that I'm creating. I want to change the way we do trauma treatment, because I think we're missing some things. And there's some therapists, I'm not going to say everybody, therapists are taught to go to the origin and go back to the root cause. And sometimes in therapy, we stay there too long and people get stuck. They're like, I came here to work on my eating issues, and now I'm 20 years later talking about my mother and my father forever. So there's this way that some parts of the field focus too much on the past and are missing forward. And then there's the whole coaching world that's like 5 steps to move forward, 10 steps to move forward. Let's move forward. Get this package and I'm going to help you be successful and manifest. So then, and obviously that's not every coaching person. So, I'm making these gross generalizations, but I'm like, yes, please, is what I'm saying. We have to go back. I'm using the word visit, don't stay. And we have to move forward. And I want to put both together.
Simultaneously.
No, in a stepwise, there's a process. You can't do it simultaneously, because I think you need to go back before you can go forward. But I don't think therapy talks enough about moving forward. Like in my healing journey, like there's this way, like heal your trauma and then it's going to be good. I'm like, well, it didn't work that way for me. There's these moments you have to take these risks, and you have to push yourself and get beyond the fear once you've let go of what you're carrying. And I've had these moments of difficult conversation. I'm very conflict avoidant because I would have gotten beaten if I brought something up. I did get hit every time I mentioned. So I had a lot of conflict avoidance in me. So after healing, and I said, we're going to go back to after healing because it's never done. I'm just going to say that. You have to move forward, and you have to take risks that are scary to show the change in your present day life. So I think both are important. And I think we haven't put them together enough yet. So it's not like coaches are wrong and therapists are wrong. It's like they're both right. But we haven't put them together in a way that is a more comprehensive model for healing trauma, in my view.
So then, in terms of, we mentioned this earlier, kind of briefly, but the idea of like talking about your trauma in the aftermath of it. You said in your book, talking too much or not enough can be both problematic. But if I'm remembering correctly, I think Bessel had said in his book something that like if you don't talk about it at all, that's extremely problematic.
Yep.
So how do you approach that in terms of verbalizing what's happening?
So we talked before about critical incident debriefing and having the sweet spot of talking about it. But what most people don't understand is you have to be with it instead of in it. And I'll explain what that means a little bit more. Reliving your experience like I did with my wife watching that movie is not helpful. That re-traumatizes, that reactivates the neural networks of trauma. So when you're talking about it, you have to have the capacity to be with the overwhelming experience in a way that's compassionate. So you don't relive it to talk about it. Oh my God, I'm back there. But you also don't talk about it as if it's this really fascinating thing that happened to somebody else. There has to be the right amount of being with that allows the part that holds the trauma to feel fully gotten. And it's not just the story, it's the thoughts, the feelings, and the physical sensation, because trauma gets encoded through every sensory modality. So you need to be with it. It needs to be witnessed and shared so that the part that holds the trauma is like, oh, he gets it. Or, oh, he gets it. I told you my therapist didn't get it during that flashback. Okay? So the witnessing, the sharing needs to happen from the part that holds the trauma's perspective.
But you can't force yourself to get into that place. How do you get to that?
No,
that
you don't
sweet
force
spot?
it.
Yeah.
But this is where therapy is helpful, and this is where all these models of therapy that work with trauma have different ways for people to be with it. Internal Family Systems, IFS, has one way. It's like the Inside Out movie. Riley is with her parts, joy, sadness, fear, and anger. So that's that model. There's body-centered therapies that talk about how to be with the physical sensations. There's EMDR that talks about how to be with the distorted memories. So there's a lot of models of therapy.
Where does CBT fit into all that?
CBT is being with the distorted thoughts. Okay? And I love all these model makers. I know them. They're my friends. And it's time to put them all together.
Yeah, integrate.
Each one of them is good, but it's not the whole. So the thoughts are great. The sensations are great. The memories are great. And we got to put them together. None of them in some ways are complete on their own. They all bring these important facets to what's necessary because it's got to be a whole felt sense. CBT alone doesn't work because it doesn't really work because it doesn't get to the emotion or the physical sensation. So you have to have all of it in your repertoire to fully get it.
EMDR is kind of strange. I've always thought about it in the past as like you're just like moving your eyes or something. Yeah. So it's strange to me in the sense of like I'm a very big thinker, right? And so like I want to know like the reasons behind something,
Right.
and EMDR seems like something that kind of in some ways fits outside of that box.
Yeah, it does.
And it's more of like a physical thing that's going on, and so
any trauma treatment has to relax your thinker. So being with physical sensations, figuring it out will never help. That's what I did in that 11 years of therapy. I knew it all. I figured it out. I understood it all, but it didn't heal. You've got to hit each dimension. EMDR, the bilateral stimulation, right brain, left brain. These are all experiential treatments. They're not figure-out treatments. I used to do psychodynamic psychotherapy. Talk therapy doesn't heal trauma either. You could talk to your blue in the face about it, and it's not going to heal it. It's got to be a felt sense of experience and that felt sense of sharing. Think about it. If you think about the part that holds the trauma, it's going to hold the trauma until it's not the only one that holds it anymore. The way it can be released is if it's like somebody else gets this. So I'm not the only holder of this experience anymore. So I can let it go because you get it now, or I can let it go because he gets it.
So there's a together kindness component.
Connection.
Yeah.
Love and connection. This shit is not random. I've spent a lot of time thinking about this. You know, trauma is held in isolation, and we have to, it's got to be shared. So let me go through the steps, because like the sharing is an important piece of it, regardless of the model, is it's got to be witnessed or shared. And this is based in neuroscience, a form of neuroscience called memory reconsolidation. Second step around the transformational healing piece is having a corrective experience. Corrective experiences are really important. I matter now. The part little Frankie is like, I matter. He's got me. He cares about me more than anybody else ever did. So there's a corrective experience internally. Relationships could be corrective experiences, relationally corrective. So it can be internal or external, but the part that holds loneliness, fear, isolation, I'm no good, I'm unlovable, needs to feel lovable, good, valuable, worthy.
That's really good.
After it's been shared, this is what I'm holding, and then you give it what it never got, the corrective experience. Then release is possible. So that's what I'm teaching the world. And I know the science, the models, I've been doing it in therapy, and it's time for me to bring this to the general public. Like I can tell you, don't know the title yet, but I'm writing a fourth book, and it's teaching the general public how to heal trauma. I'm very clear about that, because people need to know this. Like therapy's limited because we don't have enough resources for the world. It's expensive. Most people who are good don't even take insurance anymore. So we're not going to be able to heal trauma in the therapy world alone.
Where does meaning making come into the process? It's like, okay, I was sexually abused or raped, and that's it. I was just there's no and so
meaning making is a little bit mentalizing.
What do you mean?
It's a bit cognitive. I think meaning making is important, but it's after healing. It's putting it in perspective. Okay, it's putting it in perspective. So meaning making is like the end, like before or after forgiveness. I don't know. It's like after releasing. Okay, it's putting it in a context.
It's like a downstream thing that happens.
It's a downstream thing that happens. Like I can tell you, like now when I think about my dad, it's like, you know what? He was a limited guy. He really was. He was dealt a bad hand. He had a pretty bad upbringing. He was not firing on all cylinders, and he took a lot of shit out on me that I didn't deserve, and that wasn't about me. I know that now. I know that. I understand it. It makes sense to me, and I'm not carrying any feelings around it anymore. I'm free of that. So that's the meaning making. But it is much more downstream after you release all the thoughts, feelings, and physical sensations, after you've been able to let go of what you, like forgiveness is about what you carry about the other person who harmed you. Healing trauma is about releasing what you carry about what happened to you.
Well, in the sharing, the releasing, the letting go, all this stuff, one thing that's super, super hot right now is the psychedelics.
You want to go there? You're going to go to psychedelics now?
MDMA.
Okay.
Well, I'm going there because we're talking about healing.
Hey, I'm going there. The reason I say now,
yeah,
okay, it's a very complicated world. Okay, I'm very complicated for me personally because of my substance abuse history in my family. So many substances. And so I'm a little bit wary of psychedelics because some people are using them so thoughtfully and effectively.
Which is why I want to talk about it.
And
I think there's
some
a thoughtful
people are using them so crappily.
Yeah, and so I do want to preface it because I think that some people, there is a segment of population listening to us might get really upset thinking like, oh, just advocate using drugs or whatever. Yeah. And so that isn't what I'm most interested in, like primarily with this subject, is specifically with MDMA.
Yeah.
the research around people in a controlled setting,
Yep.
sitting with a therapist,
Yes.
being able to access memories and
Yep.
experiences that don't overwhelm them,
Yep.
and they're able to kind of do some of the things that you're talking about,
100%.
but that is unlocked for some reason through the
100%.
MDMA. And
100%.
so what would
Super
you say about that?
valuable.
Yeah.
I mean, some of my best friends are high up in that world. Michael Midhofer, who's the PA, him and I took level 1 IFS training in 2004 together. Libby Kolk, like I know these people. Bessel Kolk did phase 3 trials. I know the people that are in that world. Rick Dobbins, I had dinner with him in May. Like, so I know the people that are in there, and they're doing incredibly valuable, important stuff for a certain segment of the population, no doubt. Some people can't access love and compassion, and using MDMA in a controlled setting with 2 therapists helps them access love and compassion. That's what MDMA does. It activates love and compassion and connection. So yeah, it's super important. Are people using it in an untoward way? Yeah. Okay. There's several reasons why the FDA said no recently to MDMA.
Which are?
I don't want to get into some of it. Some of it's really political. Some of it makes sense. So it's complicated. I'll say a couple things. Like, some people did some pretty bad things when people are under the influence of drugs. It wasn't the most controlled study around ethnic minorities. There was some of the things that the FDA highlighted in the study protocol that they kind of used in the wrong way. So it was complicated why they said no. It's complicated. Do I think it's useful for a certain segment of the population? 100%. Do I think it's going to be valuable? And there's some people that are there's so many underground things that are happening. Oh, by the way, this is another reason why I'm like, the FDA just said no. And Matthew Perry's, death is considered a crime now because of all the ketamine that he was doing, right? The people are doing it in the wrong way. So so ketamine's getting this backlash, MDMA is getting this backlash right now. It's what happened years ago, by the way. These things used to be legal.
Well, it's being touted I mean, Michael Pollan's documentary, all that stuff, it's been touted almost as like a miracle drug for MDMA, which I think a lot of people watch it, like don't know anything about trauma, don't know anything about psychedelics. That's super convincing.
It is.
I could do it in 2 sessions and be done with my trauma for the rest of my life.
It's ridiculous. So a lot of the people that I know that are doing this work, it's like, you can't just use it. There's a hugely therapeutic effect of the drug in and of itself. And you have to be a really good trauma therapist to be able to utilize it effectively. It's an adjunctive treatment. It's not take a pill, do MDMA, and my trauma's gone. You have to have skilled people. MDMA has 3 different sessions, and the integration sessions are almost more important than the medicine sessions themselves. So you do all this residual processing after your session that is super important. I did the CAPS training, so I did ketamine-assisted training, and right now they're not teaching integration very well.
Wait, you did ketamine or you did the training?
I did the training. I did the ketamine trainings. But in the ketamine training, you have to take 2 doses of ketamine, right? So I took lozenges and had an experience, and then I took intramuscular and had an experience. One was fucking traumatic, and one was like a spiritual connection that changed my life. So it was weird to have both of these experiences in a matter of 4 days. It's like you take the medicine, you have a sitter. The next day you take the other the other person takes the medicine, have a sitter. Then you switch. You take a shot, have an experience. Take, the medicine, have an experience. And they have, like, after the training, process what you went through. But people need to process for weeks after before they have their next one. Some people go into ketamine and have IV infusions every day. Like, there's no processing that happens. So there's a way to do this from a trauma perspective that's very effective in the right hands for some people that don't have access to go to these places on their own where drugs can help them. And there's other people that are using them in crazy ways, like what's happening out in California with Matthew Perry. So it's a mixed bag, and they've got to be really careful about, oh my God, take a pill so I don't have to deal with my shit, and then it'll be
I mean, that's
over.
how desperate people are. They're just like, hey,
Right?
do you want one and
They
done?
did this with Prozac when Prozac first came out.
Yeah.
They did. So it's mixed. I'm not I'm no way an anti-psychedelics person, but I'm also not changing my whole life in practice because it's the be all end all of everything. So I'm personally somewhere in the middle. Um, yeah, that's what I'm holding. And here's another, tell you just between you and me, haha. Like some of what happened with MDMA was MAPS was the organization, and it got changed to Lycos, or I think that's what the name is, Lycos. And it became Big Pharma. And so then there was this group of people that are anti-Big Pharma that are going to take it down because they don't like where it's going. So there's this hippie people, and you want to go to Burning? Somebody just died.
So you're saying it got merged with Big Pharma?
Yes, it did. Oh, yes, it did. Yeah, and that's why there's this group that rose, that are all these hippie LSD, like people are like, you're selling out, and they were trying to take it down. So it's a very complicated.
I mean, what would you say about the studies though? Of like, okay,
Very great. Sorry, go ahead, finish your thing.
No, just the studies, like the studies.
Great studies. They did an amazing job. And MDMA, I'm talking about MDMA.
Yeah.
Ketamine was already legal because it was a drug for that we used in in surgeries as an anesthetic. So that was already legal. And then they moved it over to the psych world. Michael Meadowfer, Rick Dobbins, they did an amazing job. It was so thoughtful. I've been with him hearing about it for years. They did an incredible job. They were so thoughtful. It's kind of sad that and I don't know who the they is who sold out to the big pharmas, but they did the studies are great, and the results are incredible, and the long-term studies are amazing, and it's much better than any other drug. So that's where some of the hype is about, because it was a great job. They did an amazing job, and then it gets political, and everybody wants to make $1 million off of it, and it gets complicated. Some people are still doing it underground, and it's just like anything. Nothing is good for everything, right? And I'm using two absolutes there on purpose. So it's gonna have its place in a way that will make sense. Another piece around it is people are lumping psychedelics together, just like people lump traumas together.
Ayahuasca,
ketamine. Psilocybin, ketamine. Neurophysiologically, they're like apples and oranges. So why would they do the same thing? Ketamine's an anti-glutamate drug, okay? MDMA increases serotonin and self-compassion and oxytocin. I believe psilocybin mushrooms are more hitting the serotonin system. So why would they do the same thing if they have totally different mechanisms of action? So we don't even really differentiate which is good for what yet. They're different. You know what I mean? You don't just interchange them and lump them together, and that needs to be sorted out.
Yeah, there's so much,
right?
So much recklessness of the approach.
People. Yeah. This is what pisses me off about pot, because cannabis is also being used therapeutically in a lot of settings too. But they made it legal, so now it's the wild, wild west. My father, who had all this back pain, at one point was like, all right, he got his medical marijuana card a couple years ago, and he's like, he was a pharmacist. He's like, I went to the dispensary. He was so pissed as a pharmacist, and this purple-haired teenager is telling me which strain is good for my back pain. And he was so pissed. He's like, I took one puff and I threw it away. You know what I mean? And it's like, why is an 18-year-old purple-haired girl prescribing a medicine for this, 84-year-old pharmacist who's had back surgeries and pins and things in his back. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
when it became open to the general public, like who's really regulating it, and are we doing it thoughtfully?
Yeah. Finding a therapist.
Yeah.
So what would you say about finding someone who's actually effective? And 'cause this was part of your own journey,
It's a
right?
wild, wild west. So finding a therapist in general is hard. Who knows what? Therapy is not regulated like cardiology or internal medicine is. It's still hard to find a good doctor, right? That fits you. Hard to find a good therapist. Even harder to find a good psychedelics therapist because there's the drug effect, and there is a therapeutic effect of the drugs. They increase neuroplasticity in the brain. They can cause a spiritual experience. They do a lot of things to your brain physiologically during the drug. So the drug has a therapeutic effect. Who's trained in what? As the sitter. That's what we call them in psychedelics, is the sitter, the therapist who's sitting with the person. The good news about MDMA is it's going to, whenever, if it ever gets approved, you have to do it with two therapists. You can't, 6 to 8 hours, two therapists. And that was part of what the FDA required, which I think is great. You can't just do it if you're going to do it legally. Take it and go home. Ketamine, people are taking it at home all the time, which is so stupid, in my opinion. So, but the therapists are not trained in a specific model. So when I did my ketamine training, there's massage therapists, there's EMDR therapists, there's end-of-life people who are internists. There's all these different people who are not uniformly trained helping people as a sitter. Now, a lot of the studies are showing somatic work or body work is really useful, but they don't have a formalized model of therapy. Michael wanted me to train people in IFS, because IFS is a pretty good model, because people spontaneously talk about their different parts of their personality when they're in MDMA, but the reason they couldn't train everybody in IFS to do MDMA is the pushback from the FDA was, this is about a drug, not about a model of therapy. So they had to prove the effectiveness of the drug, and it's a confounding variable if you bring in a model of treatment.
Well,
See what I'm saying? So it's a little bit, some people who are sitting with people are great at it because they know how to do effective trauma treatment before they learned the psychedelics. And other people are like, I want to be a good therapist, I'll do psychedelic training. And they don't really know how to treat trauma. Do you see what I'm saying?
yeah. What if you zoom out and forget the psychedelics? You're just looking for a trauma therapist. What would the starting point be for somebody?
Yeah. Love and connection. I'm sorry. I'm going to keep coming back to that. And I'm not sorry. Like, you've got to find somebody who you really feel gets you. And you also have to know enough about the different models of therapy for trauma. So it's twofold for me. There are certain types of treatment that are better for trauma than others. And most of the general public do not know this. EMDR is one of them, sensory motor psychotherapy, somatic experiencing, IFS. So there are certain models of therapy that are important because people like, I want a therapist. What do I go to? There's all, so you need to get educated about the models of therapy. Bessel's book is great for that because he mentions in the back section all the different trauma models of therapy. Mm-hmm. And you have to be with somebody who you feel gets you, who you can feel connected to. And what I teach, and people don't even know that and I'm teaching this now, which is a little bit different than what we're taught, is you have to love your patients. And I use the word love. Like, you have to love your patients. We're taught to be distant and be appropriate and have appropriate boundaries. Yes, boundaries are important. You're not supposed to act on your feelings, but you need to love them, because that's, for me, a requirement for healing. You have to feel gotten in a way that's authentic and close. And so I'm working with therapists around how do we bring ourselves to that work wholly and authentically versus being this blank slate who has a good technique, because it won't heal trauma, in my view.
That's good.
Right? So I think it's a combination of how does this feel? And most trauma survivors disconnect from their instinct to survive trauma. So they're not great at picking. They're not great at picking partners, and they're not great at picking therapists because they've disconnected from their intuition to survive.
Yeah, it's good. Well, where I want to land, I think the perfect place to land, I think, is back on your story, because you know, we've covered so much ground about trauma.
We have.
But you, as Frank, are sitting here in front of us.
Yeah.
Maybe not fully healed, but on that healing journey,
100%.
Significantly down the road in that healing journey.
Yeah.
And if I learned, there was, at the end of that book, part of the reason why I was like breaking down crying is there was so many rich, mature insights. And I'm like, how did this guy get to these insights? And so I want to go back to a moment. And so which really helps articulate this healing journey. So this moment when your dad was about to die, and you basically had your last visit with him when he was still completely conscious.
Oh, you're going to make me cry.
And so, you know, upon arriving in Chicago, you wrote, "That's when it hit me. I'm here to help him die." And so can you share what happened that day and what he had said to you?
Oh, So that day, there's a beginning and an ending to that visit, which are very different. But the beginning of the visit was me helping him die, which I didn't understand at the time, but he had fallen, he had a stroke. I think 3 weeks had gone by. My mother hadn't left the house. She was a wreck. My sisters were totally overwhelmed because they were taking care of their families and him. And so I'm like, I'm coming. I'm traveling all over the world, and 3 days off, I'd like zoom in and I come in. And it was fascinating because, like, Mom, go get your hair done. Like, go do what you need to do. Go. Oh, I can't leave him. I'm like, I'm here. I've got it. And oh my goodness. So there was the changing him and bathing him, which was just so powerful because he was like a skeleton of a human being. He looked like a concentration camp survivor. And so the fragility in him was so palpable that I couldn't believe I was there doing that. Like, this guy who was like cocksucking motherfucking son of a bitch is like this waif of a human being who I'm bathing. And I spent way too much time in the bathroom with my mother in a way that was really uncomfortable for me. So I'm like, I'm fucking here with my father now, who's naked. I didn't want to be here then, and I don't want to be here now, but my heart was so full of compassion for him that it was just, I can't not do this. So there was that piece that was very powerful. I think that's where my heart started melting. And then he was lying on the couch. I bought him this mat for his back, like a massage mat. And he was like, "This is the best present I ever got in my life." And he would go on it like 5 times a day because his back was in so much pain. And he started reviewing his life. And he couldn't do it with my mother because she couldn't handle losing him. So he started reviewing his life, which was really, Frank, I had a good life, you know? And I just was like, oh my God, like, he needs to talk about this. He knows he's dying, and I'm here to help him with it. And, you know, and I didn't need to negate anything he said, or that's not how I saw it, or that's not what I remember, Dad. It's like, yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. You know, and it's like, your mom's insecure and she's not going to do well. I need you to take care of her. Will you take care of her? I'm like, yeah, Dad, I'll take care of her. And we had great vacations. Didn't we have great vacations when we were a kid? When you were a kid? Yeah, Dad, we did. Like, so I just was there helping him transition. He had a lot that he was holding that he needed to say before he left. And I was the one who, he couldn't talk to my sisters, he couldn't talk to my mom. So it was kind of an honor as the firstborn son to realize that, oh my God, I was the one he hated so much, that was the object of his hate, is now the one who was the one who can help him in that way. So that was kind of a powerful experience. And then at the end, he just, that's a moment at the end. The last time I saw him, I will never forget it in my whole life, because it was a moment of true, authentic love and connection between us, kind of for the first and last time in my life with him. And that was amazing. It was amazing. And I felt love for him, and I felt love from him in a way that brought my whole life into focus and my whole healing journey in a full circle, to be like hit in the crib and then him and his death. And it did something to me that I think many people haven't had the gift of experiencing, that I do think it's my purpose to share with the world. And I feel like it is part of my purpose. The last third of the book was written in real time. So I was told to write a memoir, and then my life unfolded to support the story instead of the other way around, which was amazing. So all that was happening while I was writing, and I think I captured something there that was more real than most people can recount in retrospect. And I think that's part of the function of this book. It's being turned into a movie now, which I'm really thrilled about. I kind of always knew that. I always knew it would happen that way, because I think this is a story that was brought to me to bring to the world. That's the way I hold it.
When you say that you found that love and connection with him, what was said or like that really made you feel that way?
I wasn't the father you needed or wanted, but I always loved you. That's what he said to me the last time I saw him. And that was like, oh my God, I never cried so much in my whole life. Like, it was the acknowledgement for the first time ever. Like, the acknowledgement. Wasn't the father you needed and wanted, but I always loved you. And I believe that was true. And I think that was his way of apologizing and acknowledging what happened, which had never happened in my life. That was huge for me. And it was like a moment where love flowed for and from. That's the best way I can say. It's like I felt his love. And then I felt love for him. It was like a moment of joining. And to be, at that time, I guess I was 59 maybe when that happened. 59 years of not having that at all is a long time. And like to have it in a moment was amazing. Like I fucking cried on the plane ride home. Like I couldn't stop myself. My sister drove me to the airport. I was crying. I couldn't even speak. And I'm writing. I'm like on the airplane writing. And these people are looking at me like, do we need to call somebody? Like snots are coming out of my nose. I just couldn't help it. It was like a watershed. It was a watershed of like 59 years of not feeling love, or sorrow or pain, And I was so grateful. I am so grateful for that. Like I'm a fully feeling human being now. That's what I am. I'm a fully feeling human being. I could feel the range of feelings in a way that's so amazing. Drives my kids crazy. They're like, "You're crying again?" And I'm like, "You damn right I'm crying again," because I was so cut off.
You wrote in the beginning of your book, which touches on the meaning thing that I said earlier, but it was just wild to me that you dedicated partially to your father and you called him your greatest teacher.
My father and my sons. Yeah.
How is it possible that Someone
because
who did that to you could be your greatest teacher.
Because he was. Because I learned something that most people will never learn in their lifetime. I learned about pain and difficulty and adversity, and it's from pain to purpose is what I think happened to me, and what I think everybody should think about for themselves. Like, I was a psychiatrist in an office seeing people. Now I'm like writing movies and being on TV. And I have this life that's like crazy. And it's because I was told after transcending trauma that you're to bring trauma healing to the world. I got a voice like, are you crazy? Me? Like, are you kidding? And here I'm having this life that's just so beyond what I would have ever imagined. And now I understand why. It's clear to me. Like, I am bringing trauma healing to the world. I'm not the only one. There's no way I'm the only one, but I am bringing trauma healing to the world. My life is unfolding in this crazy way, and it would never have done that. And I can't sit here across from you with the kind of clarity and confidence I have about trauma healing had I not gone through what I went through. I don't think that Bessel van der Kolk can talk about trauma the way that I can talk about trauma. You said it in the beginning. You're like, you're Ivy League, Harvard-trained psychiatrist who's lived through it and told the world about it. Now, there's not that many people who have done that. And I'm not the only one, but I am one of them that knows it from the inside out. And that has impact.
The level of healing and maturity that I saw from your story, probably the most mature insight I've seen is you said, I've experienced a new dimension of forgiveness, one that comes after the wounds you carry, offering love and compassion to your abuser. And you talked about this repetitive cycle that we talked about in the beginning, which is it's when you see humanity in those who have hurt you that you're able to have self-compassion for what you've done to yourself and others. This, I believe, is the full cycle of healing. And so if you look at trauma as this just kind of open wound or this circle, you're kind of closing that circle, coming full circle. And I think it's just absolutely mind-blowing probably to some people who are listening right now who can't even imagine having that type of compassion. Exactly. But I think that compassion is a result of the healing that you've had.
Yeah, so here are a couple things. Like, yes, but the compassion is the result of releasing what I carry, because we all have compassion, and I think we're born with it.
Yeah,
I think that's where we come from. So it's getting back to the me before my trauma is the way I think about it. It's the releasing that most people don't do or can't imagine, that I never thought was possible. And like when I had this weird, another premonition, like before he died, this was like months before when my family went to visit him, like the life of kids, this is the last time you're gonna see grandpa, blah, 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 blah. I was like, I'm gonna prepare his funeral. I thought that was a stupid thing to think. Why am I thinking about that? I'm like, I'm gonna be the one. I'm gonna make an amazing send-off for this man. And it was such a weird thought for me to have. I didn't even know what it meant at the time. And I'm like, oh, you're the firstborn Italian son, it's what you're supposed to do. But what ended up happening was I felt love. And I wanted to give him a good send-off from love. And it was the most freeing feeling. Like, that was a full circle moment for me. I was like how more free can you be than to love somebody who's brutalized you? Like, there's nothing freer than that. Like, that is the ultimate in freedom. And I felt that. I was like, I am not carrying anything of what you did to me anymore, because I could love you despite what you did to me. And it was amazing to feel. I was like, oh my, I had no idea it could be this free, you know? And I experienced that. So that was incredible. And you know, we talk about how young I look. I don't think that's coincidental. I really don't. I think I think I look really young because I am in spirit and soul. I'm so clean and clear of the human garbage we accumulate. Am I done? Hell no. Will I ever be done? No. I don't think permanently healing. I don't think permanent healing exists. I think it's layers of release and elevation. We release and we elevate. We release and we elevate. We release and we elevate. And I don't want to sound better than or mighty. It's not about that. It's about the message I've been given to communicate to people.
I don't think you do at all. I think this is amazing. I think it's so insightful. I think just groundbreaking type stuff for people to hear. And I mean, I only really have two last questions. One of them is how important do you feel like that closure that you had almost with your father? And you know, there's some added complication with your mother now because of the book, but you know, you've had moments that in the book you talked about that kind of like at least a first level or some closure happening with the loop there. How important do you think that closure is? Because a lot of people never get that in this life.
I think, like I said, my life supported this story. So I think it was important for me as one of the teachers of this lesson for people. So I think it was important for me to go through that whole thing so that I can translate it and teach it and show the world that it's possible. So I think for me it was important because no psychotherapy brought me there. No book I ever read brought me there. It was only through my life experience that I had this complete cycle of healing. So I think for me it was very important because my purpose is to share it with the world. I think, and I'm grateful, it's a gift. It was such a gift, right? I think different people are here to learn different things, and that everybody doesn't have to have the complete cycle to be healed. Some people get really pissed off, and I never say forgiveness is a requirement, because I don't think it is. Some people will say, I've been violated in a way and I'll never forgive them. I'm like, okay, that's where you are at, and that's important for you, and you be empowered in a way that works for you. So I don't feel like everybody has to have the same experience. I think we go where we're capable of and where we're interested in growing. And I do think we all are here to learn different things for different reasons. So I was here to learn this and teach it. So I just, that's what I hold. Not everybody's going to have that.
And lastly, what would you say to someone who feels hopeless in their trauma right now?
Look, it's possible. Look at me, it's possible for you. And I really do believe that it's possible. I really do. Like, some people don't want it. Some people aren't interested in it. I think it's possible for everyone. Like, why should I be here from where I came from? Like, it's a weird life to start getting hit in the crib. So when you're you're hopeless, you don't think this is possible, like look at me, it's possible. I really think it's possible. And if you don't want it, you don't want it. But I really believe it's possible because I think we all come from love, God, whatever you want to call it. So I think you can all connect back to that if you heal your trauma. I really do.
So beautiful. Thank you so much for today. This was incredible. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.